Hello and welcome to Naroshan's Novel Study Podcast, where we talk about novels and discuss a variety of literary ideas and elements within these novels. I'm your host, Naroshan, and on today's podcast, we'll be talking about the novel 5 Feet Apart by Rachel Lippincott, Mickey Dougherty, and Tobias Ikonis. 5 Feet Apart is a romantic novel which was published on November 20th, 2018. Today we're discussing 6 aspects of the novel: the setting, main characters, style, theme, main issue, and the similarities and differences between the novel and the movie. Stay tuned at the end for an interview with our special guest, Rachel Lippincott, the author of the novel. 5 Feet Apart is about 2 teenagers named Stella and Will who both have cystic fibrosis, also known as CF. For those that may not know, CF is a genetic disorder that causes buildup of thick, sticky mucus, which can damage the body's organs, especially the lungs. Stella meets Will at the hospital as they're both in the same special treatment program. Will doesn't take his medical treatment, but Stella later on convinces him to follow through with his treatment. As Will has B. cepacia, which is a bacteria that can be deadly to someone with CF, they're not allowed to be within 6 feet of each other. During the time Stella helps Will follow through with his treatment, they become close and eventually start having feelings for each other. Stella and Will fall in love, and when they're physically together, they stay 5 feet apart instead of 6 feet, which suggests the title of the novel. After waiting for several years, Stella receives a lung transplant. Will leaves Stella as he doesn't want to put her life in danger because of his condition. 8 months later, they run into each other again. The first topic we'll be discussing is the setting of the novel. Most of this novel takes place at St. Grace's Hospital, where Stella and Will are patients. Will is a new patient to this hospital, unlike Stella, who has been coming to the hospital since she was 6 years old. Throughout the novel, we see them visit places within the hospital like the pool, gym, NICU, rooftop, and the cafeteria. Stella feels very comfortable at the hospital as she refers to it as her home away from home. Next, we'll be discussing the style. The novel is written in the first-person point of view, switching back and forth through Stella and Will's perspective. Rachel Lippincott uses a narrative writing style which is easy for the readers to understand. It also allows her to express the story creatively. The third topic of our discussion will be about the main characters. There are many characters within the novel, which include the main characters Stella Grant, Will Newman, Poe Ramirez, and Barbara. Stella Grant is the protagonist of the novel. She is 16 years old and has a genetic disorder called cystic fibrosis. She is very responsible, organized, and mentally strong. Stella also has a YouTube channel where she uploads videos about her treatment and her life. Will Newman is 17 years old and has cystic fibrosis as well as B. cepacia. He's careless and doesn't like to follow his treatment. Stella describes him as having dark chocolate brown hair and eyes that are deep blue. Will is a risk taker and doesn't like to follow rules. He also enjoys drawing and creating art pieces. Poe Ramirez is Stella's good friend and also has cystic fibrosis. They meet in the hospital when they were little. Poe enjoys skateboarding and cooking. Barbara is a nurse working at St. Grace's Hospital. She is one of the nurses that take care of Stella and Will. She's very protective of her patients because of past incidents that have occurred. She's always keeping an eye on Will and Stella to make sure Stella stays safe because of Will's condition. Next, we'll be discussing the themes in the novel. The major themes suggested in this novel are rebellion, love, as well as life and death. Rebellion is a significant part of the story. Plenty of rules are set for characters to follow, which are put in place to safeguard their lives. At the start of the novel, we see Stella carefully following the guidelines and rules set in place for her, unlike Will, who has been showing a rebellious attitude from the beginning. It's clear Will doesn't like his treatment, as he says, "If I'm going to die, I'd like to actually live first." He feels the hospital lifestyle isn't letting him live freely. As the novel progresses, we see them both slowly start to break rules as they want to have more freedom. Both Stella and Will believe that living life how they want is more important than trying to live longer. Another major theme in the novel is love. Love plays a big role in this novel as it can be seen through family, friends, and hospital staff. Love is very powerful because some people even put their life in danger for it. Love can even change a person's life drastically. In this case, Will, who at the beginning of the novel didn't want to take his medications or wasn't hopeful about getting better, changes his outlook after meeting Stella, which makes him a happier and more hopeful person. The love between Will and Stella is complicated because they must always remain 6 feet apart. We also read about the love and care the hospital staff have for their patients. We see the close bond they form to the point where they see them as family. Life and death is also a main theme in the novel. Will and Stella are risking their lives to be with each other. They're constantly in a battle between life and death. Having cystic fibrosis, they're grateful for every moment they have to live. Stella truly values life as she experienced the death of her close friend Poe and her sister Abby, which have clearly affected Stella. Throughout the novel, we see Stella and Will putting their lives in danger to live life to the fullest because they don't know how much more time they have to live. The fifth topic will be about the main conflict. The main conflict in the novel is that Stella and Will must always remain 6 feet apart. This is because they both have CF, but Will also has B. cepacia, which is a bacteria that can be extremely dangerous for Stella. If Stella gets infected by Will, she could lose her opportunity to receive a lung transplant, and she can possibly die. It's very hard for them to be together because people want them to be separated. The nurses constantly have an eye on them, especially Barb, who tells them, 6 feet apart at all times. You both know the rules. On top of the problems they have from their medical condition and family, they're still fighting to be together. Finally, we'll be discussing the similarities and differences between the novel and movie. Even though the movie was being created at the same time as the novel and was even finished being filmed before the novel was published, there are still many similarities and differences between them. A major similarity is the dialogues that the characters say in the novel are very similar to those said in the movie. I recognized most of the lines the characters were saying when I was watching the movie. There are several differences between the novel and the movie, but one of the big differences is the point of view. In the novel, the point of view is first person and the perspective switches from Stella to Will every other chapter. Unlike the novel, the movie mostly focuses on Stella's life and doesn't switch back and forth constantly between their lives. Another major difference is that in the novel, it's very clear that Stella's parents are separated, and Stella is spending a lot of time trying to reunite them. In the movie, you barely see the relationship between Stella and her parents. There are only a few scenes in the movie where you see the parents, and none of them involve her trying to reunite her parents. One of the most significant differences between the novel and movie was how it ended. In the novel, the story ends with a scene of Stella and Will in the airport 8 months after their breakup. The movie just closed with Stella filming a YouTube video describing the importance of touch. Now for our interview segment, we have our special guest, the author of 5 Feet Apart, Rachel Lippincott. Thanks for being here, Rachel.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Rachel, would you be able to tell me a bit about yourself?
For sure. I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a BA in English Writing. I'm a #1 New York Times best-selling author for my book, 5 Feet Apart. I also run a food truck in Pittsburgh where I'm currently living.
Wow, that's wonderful. When I was reading this novel, I couldn't help but think of the situation we're all in right now. With COVID-19, we're told to keep 6 feet apart from one another, which has been extremely difficult for many. And through this novel, it shines light on the lives of the people who are living with cystic fibrosis. People could really understand how hard it was for Stella and Will.
That is true. We're all social distancing right now, and it's hard for us to be apart from one another. Sadly, this is the reality for people with cystic fibrosis. They need to stay away from others who have CF. This may include their close family and friends.
It's like we're able to relate to them in this aspect of staying apart from each other.
I totally agree.
So I didn't discuss this at the start of the podcast because I wanted to ask you personally. Is it realistic that Stella doesn't get infected by Will when they touch each other and even do mouth-to-mouth towards the end of the novel?
That's a very good question. It's realistic that Stella doesn't get infected by Will, but there is a big possibility for someone with CF to get infected with B. cepacia by direct contact, such as mouth-to-mouth.
Okay, I understand. In the novel, I realized that Stella had many problems beside her medical condition, like her parents separating and her sister passing away. Why did you choose to include these problems on top of her health problems?
In our daily lives, we all face many problems and challenges, and this is no different for people with medical conditions. The reason I chose to include multiple problems for Stella was to showcase how strong and determined she was through the problems she was facing.
Totally, that makes a lot of sense. So finally, the last question I have for you is, what are your upcoming plans in your career?
Well, I'm currently working on my next novel called All This Time. It's a romance novel about a boy recovering from a coma who meets his dream girl, but he might not be able to stay with her. I plan on publishing the novel in September 2020.
I'm really looking forward to reading it. Wow, Rachel, it's been great talking to you and finding out more about the novel. Thanks for coming out today.
No problem. It's been fun talking to you.
Thank you all for tuning in to today's podcast. That was a wonderful discussion about the novel 5 Feet Apart. I really hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you tune into next week's podcast where we'll be discussing the novel The Silent Patient by Alex Michael Eades. This has been your host Naroshan, and I'll catch you next week. As always, I hope you have a fantastic day.